January of 1992, 18-year-old Andrea King left her home in British Columbia, full of excitement and hope for her first solo adventure across Canada. She'd been saving money for months, planning to travel coast to coast, experience new places, and meet new people along the way. Her first stop was Halifax, Nova Scotia, a city she had never visited before. Andrea had arranged to stay at a local youth hostel and was eager to explore the city's waterfront, historic streets, and vibrant culture. On New Year's Day, she boarded her flight, calling her family to let them know she had arrived safely. That phone call was brief and ordinary, but it would become the last time her family would hear her voice. Upon landing at Halifax International Airport, she made her way to the hostel, excited to settle in and begin this chapter of her journey. Everything about her trip seemed routine and hopeful, but in the quiet of the city, a series of events was about to unfold that would shatter her family's world and leave Halifax haunted by questions that remain unanswered to this day. After arriving in Halifax on January 1st, 1992, Andrea King's family expected to hear from her again within a few days. She was an organized and responsible young woman, careful to check in with loved ones while traveling. But the calls never came, days turned into a week, and the silence grew heavier with each passing day. Andrea's mother, Anne King, grew increasingly anxious. She tried calling the hostel where Andrea was supposed to be staying, but staff there told her that Andrea had never checked in. Concern turned quickly into fear as it became clear that something was very wrong. By January 4th, Anne King decided to take formal action. She reported Andrea as a missing person to the Halifax Regional Police. At first, the response from authorities was discouraging. They treated Andrea's disappearance as a case of a young adult taking an unannounced trip rather than a potential crime. This initial dismissal frustrated the family, as they knew Andrea's habits and character, understanding that she would never leave without telling anyone. Every day, without news, was an agonizing reminder of the uncertainty surrounding her fate. In the weeks following the report, the investigation began in earnest, but progress was slow. Police reached out to local airports, hostels, and transportation services, searching for records of Andrea's movements, yet found nothing beyond her initial arrival. Flyers were posted throughout the city, and local media covered the story, hoping someone might have seen her. Friends and fellow travelers were interviewed, but no new leads emerged. Andrea's absence from the hostel, combined with her lack of contact with family, created a trail that ended abruptly, leaving investigators with only questions and theories. The silence surrounding Andrea's whereabouts persisted for nearly a full year. Her family refused to give up hope, constantly pushing the police for updates and scouring the city for any trace of their daughter. Anne King even traveled to Halifax herself, distributing posters and speaking with local businesses and residents, desperate for someone to remember something small. A conversation, a sighting, a detail that might provide a clue. The sense of dread grew heavier with each passing month, and the realization that Andrea's disappearance was not a simple case of a young woman traveling alone became increasingly apparent. By December of 1992, the family and investigators had exhausted every conventional lead. The lack of information left the case in a limbo of uncertainty, with frustration mounting on all sides. Halifax, a city full of life and movement, seemed to conceal the truth behind a veil of normalcy, holding the mystery of Andrea King's fate just out of reach. It was a year marked by unanswered questions, and little did anyone know that the shocking discovery of her remains was just around the corner, ready to turn this missing person investigation into a chilling cold case. Nearly a year after Andrea King disappeared, on December 22nd, 1992, a man walking his dog in a wooded area near the Sackville Business Park in Halifax stumbled upon a disturbing scene. The location, on the outskirts of the city, yet close to bustling suburban developments, immediately caught the attention of police. Halifax Regional Police were called to the scene, and investigators quickly confirmed the worst. The remains were those of 18-year-old Andrea King. The discovery transformed the case from a missing person investigation into a homicide, raising urgent questions about how such a young woman could vanish and end up in that location without anyone noticing. The site itself was a mix of dense woods and lightly trodden paths, making it an odd place for a person to be found by accident. Police cordoned off the area and began a meticulous search for evidence, documenting the surroundings for any clues that might indicate how Andrea had been brought there. Although the body had been exposed to the elements for nearly a year, investigators still hoped that even the smallest trace, footprints, discarded items, or personal belongings, might provide a lead. Every detail mattered, as time had eroded much of the physical evidence. The discovery immediately drew media attention, and Andrea's family was notified, shattering them once again with grief and disbelief. Ann King described the moment as the realization of their worst fears, finally confirming that their daughter had not simply disappeared, but had been taken from them. The police now faced the challenge of piecing together the events of nearly 12 months prior, trying to identify potential witnesses and reconstruct Andrea's final hours in Halifax. Investigators began retracing her steps, revisiting hostels, transport hubs, and areas where Andrea was known to have spent time. They conducted interviews with locals, workers, and anyone who might have seen her during her brief stay in the city. Witness statements were sparse, and few provided consistent or actionable information. The case highlighted the difficulties of investigating a crime long after it occurred, as memories fade and evidence degrades. At the same time, forensic examinations were underway. Although DNA technology was still developing, police collected every possible sample for future testing. Clothing, personal items, and remnants found near the scene were preserved with care, in hopes that advances in technology could eventually provide answers. The realization that Andrea's disappearance had ended in murder intensified the urgency. Yet, it also underscored the challenges investigators faced with limited leads and nearly a year of lost time. As the investigation continued, it became clear that someone had intentionally brought Andrea to that secluded area. This fact shifted the focus of the investigation to individuals with potential knowledge of her movements and those with a history of predatory behavior. Halifax Regional Police maintained a perimeter of interest, interviewing known offenders and cross-referencing information from other unsolved cases. The discovery was both a breakthrough and a heartbreak. It confirmed Andrea's fate, but left an even deeper mystery. Who was responsible, and why had the crime gone unnoticed for so long? The case became a chilling reminder that even in a modern city, a young person could vanish, and crucial evidence could easily slip through the cracks. From this point onward, the investigation would focus on building connections between Andrea, her final known locations, and any individuals who might have interacted with her. The police recognized that solving this case would require patience, persistence, and an openness to new forensic methods as they developed in the coming decades. Every day brought the hope that a lead, no matter how small, could finally bring Andrea King's killer to justice. As the investigation into Andrea King's death progressed, Halifax Regional Police focused on individuals with known histories of violent or predatory behavior. One name that repeatedly surfaced was Andrew Paul Johnson, a former Halifax resident with a documented record as a sex offender. Johnson had been previously implicated in other unsolved cases, including the 1989 disappearance of Kimberly McAndrew, a young woman whose case bore some similarities to Andrea's. While police had no direct evidence linking him to Andrea at first, his criminal history made him a person of interest. By the late 1990s, investigators began to piece together more circumstantial connections. While serving time in a British Columbia prison, Johnson participated in a sex offender treatment program, which included writing exercises. One essay he produced described a fictional abduction and murder of a young woman, and the details alarmingly matched theories police had about Andrea King's disappearance and death. Though it was not a confession, it provided investigators with a disturbing insight into his mindset and possible methods. In addition to the essay, investigators discovered a compact mirror belonging to Andrea in a location associated with Johnson. The mirror became a key piece of physical evidence, suggesting he had been in possession of her personal property. Police hoped that combining this evidence with witness statements and behavioral patterns could build a strong case. For the King family, the discovery offered a glimmer of hope that someone was finally within reach of being held accountable. Despite these developments, the case remained complex. Much of the evidence was circumstantial, and the legal standards for prosecution required more definitive proof. Johnson's known history, though disturbing, was not enough to secure a conviction without a direct connection to the murder itself. Police continued to pursue every lead, re-interviewing witnesses and reviewing case files from other unsolved crimes in the region to identify patterns or overlaps. The limitations of forensic science in the early 1990s also hindered progress. While evidence such as the mirror and traces collected from the scene were preserved, DNA testing was still in its infancy. Investigators documented and safeguarded every piece of material they could, anticipating future advances that might provide a breakthrough. Over the following years, the case remained active, with detectives revisiting files, analyzing reports, and maintaining pressure on persons of interest, including Johnson. Throughout this time, Andrea's family remained heavily involved, advocating for continued attention to the case. They attended public meetings, engaged with media, and lobbied for the investigation to utilize emerging forensic techniques. Their persistence helped keep Andrea's story in the public eye, emphasizing that unresolved cases affect entire communities, and that time alone does not erase the need for justice. By the early 2000s, cold case detectives formally re-examined the evidence, hoping that advances in DNA testing could finally link Johnson to the crime. The combination of his past, the essay, and possession of Andrea's belongings made him a strong candidate for further scrutiny. However, the investigation was about to face a devastating setback that would further complicate an already difficult search for justice. The tangled web of circumstantial evidence, evolving forensic technology, and bureaucratic hurdles highlighted the challenges faced by law enforcement in solving crimes that had been left unresolved for years. Despite being a prime suspect, Johnson would not face trial for Andrea King's murder, leaving the case suspended in a state of limbo and Andrea's family still searching for answers. This moment marked both the high point of investigative progress and a new low in the ongoing struggle to secure justice. By the mid-2000s, investigators were hopeful that modern forensic science could finally provide the breakthrough needed in Andrea King's case. DNA technology had advanced significantly, and cold case detectives requested that preserved evidence from the scene, including the compact mirror and other personal items, be tested using the latest methods. The hope was that a clear genetic profile could either confirm suspicions about Andrew Paul Johnson or identify another individual connected to the crime. However, a shocking discovery derailed these efforts. When police went to retrieve the evidence from storage, several critical items were missing. The disappearance of these materials meant that the possibility of a definitive forensic link had vanished. Without this proof, prosecutors could not move forward, and Johnson, while still a person of interest due to his prior offenses and the circumstantial evidence, could not be formally charged with Andrea's murder. The loss of evidence was a devastating blow to both the investigation and Andrea's family, extinguishing a rare opportunity for closure. Despite these setbacks, law enforcement has never officially closed the case. Halifax Regional Police continue to classify Andrea King's murder as active and ongoing, encouraging anyone with information, even seemingly minor details, to come forward. Over the years, tips have occasionally surfaced, but none have led to an arrest or trial. Authorities have stressed the importance of community involvement, noting that even a small piece of information can be critical in solving long unsolved crimes. The King family has remained a steadfast presence in keeping Andrea's memory alive and advocating for justice. Anne King, Andrea's mother, has spoken publicly about the case, urging witnesses or anyone with knowledge to contact police. Her persistence has ensured that Andrea's story continues to be recognized, preventing it from fading into obscurity despite more than 3 decades passing since her disappearance. Today, Andrea King's murder stands as one of Nova Scotia's most chilling cold cases. The combination of lost evidence, circumstantial connections to a prime suspect, and the passage of time has made resolution difficult, but the case has never been abandoned. Investigators and the family alike hold on to the hope that advances in forensic science, renewed tips, or someone coming forward could finally bring answers. Andrea's story is a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the lasting impact of unresolved crime. It highlights the need for meticulous evidence preservation and continuous investigation in cold cases, and it emphasizes the human toll when justice is delayed. For her family, the absence of resolution has meant living with grief, uncertainty, and unanswered questions for decades. The Halifax Regional Police and the Nova Scotia Department of Justice have offered a reward of up to 150,000 Canadian dollars for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person or persons responsible. This incentive, along with ongoing public appeals, aims to generate new leads that could finally unlock the mystery surrounding Andrea King's death. Andrea King's journey ended tragically, but her story is far from forgotten. The hope remains that someday, through science, witness testimony, or a long overdue confession, the case will be solved. Until then, her family, community, and investigators continue to keep her memory alive, determined to ensure that the young woman who set out for adventure is remembered, and that justice, though delayed, is never denied. On a warm summer night in late August of 1999, Jason MacCullough left a gathering at a friend's house in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. It was a humid evening, and the air was thick with the sounds of the neighborhood. Jason had spent time with friends on Joseph Young Street, but as the night grew later, he decided to head home. He lived with his parents just a short distance away on Russell Street. The fastest way to get there was by cutting through Highfield Park, a well-worn pathway that connected Joseph Young Street to Pinecrest Drive. It was a common route, one that Jason had walked before. The area was surrounded by duplexes, apartment buildings, and basketball courts, and many local residents used the path regularly. But this night would be different. At approximately 1:30 in the morning, on August 28, Jason MacCullough was shot at near point-blank range while walking along the pathway. Residents in nearby homes heard the gunfire, followed by the sound of footsteps quickly scattering into the night. Concerned, someone called the police. An hour later, at 2:30 in the morning, officers arrived at the scene and discovered Jason's body on the path between 2 apartment buildings at 100 and 104 Pinecrest Drive. He was less than 6 blocks from home. Jason was only 19 years old. By all accounts, he was a kind, quiet young man who had never been involved in any criminal activity. He had no known enemies, no history of violence, and no apparent reason to be targeted. His murder appeared to be entirely senseless. Investigators arrived at the scene and began searching for evidence, but there was little to go on. Jason had not been robbed, and nothing of value had been taken. There were no immediate suspects and no clear motive. The crime had occurred in a residential area where people lived, worked, and went about their daily lives. It seemed likely that someone had seen or heard something. Yet, as the hours passed and the investigation began, one thing became clear. Jason MacCullough's murder would not be an easy case to solve. When police arrived at the scene in the early morning hours of August 28, 1999, they immediately began securing the area and collecting any potential evidence. The pathway where Jason MacCullough was found was surrounded by multi-unit housing, meaning there were numerous people living nearby. Officers went door to door, hoping to find witnesses who had seen or heard something unusual that night. Some residents reported hearing a gunshot, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps moving away from the area. However, no one had seen the shooting take place, and there were no immediate descriptions of a suspect. With no security cameras in the area at the time, police were left without crucial visual evidence. Investigators processed the crime scene carefully. The fact that Jason had not been robbed suggested that the motive was not theft. There were no immediate signs of a struggle, leading police to believe that the attack had been swift and unexpected. The location of the shooting also raised questions. While Highfield Park was a known shortcut, it was also a relatively open space, surrounded by residential buildings. The fact that someone had fired a gun in such a public area meant the killer had either acted impulsively or felt confident that they would not be caught. Over the next several days, police expanded their investigation. They reviewed Jason's background, speaking with his family, friends, and co-workers. Everyone who knew him described him as a responsible and kind young man, with no involvement in criminal activity. He was known for volunteering with local organizations and helping neighbors with everyday tasks. There was nothing in his past that suggested he had been in danger. Despite the efforts of law enforcement, there were no clear leads in the case. Without a motive or a suspect, the investigation faced immediate challenges. Police appealed to the public for information, hoping that someone who had been in the area that night would come forward. However, in the days following the murder, no new witnesses emerged. As time passed, frustration grew within both the police department and the community. Jason's family was left searching for answers, while investigators struggled with the reality that the case was already becoming difficult to solve. With no immediate leads, police turned to forensic analysis in hopes of uncovering evidence that could point them toward Jason MacCullough's killer. Officers examined the crime scene carefully, searching for anything that might have been left behind by the perpetrator. They looked for footprints, fingerprints, or any objects that could be connected to the crime. However, the results of their search were disappointing. There were no obvious signs pointing to a suspect. Detectives also considered the possibility that Jason had been followed that night. They retraced his steps from the party on Joseph Young Street to the pathway where he was killed, trying to determine if anyone could have been watching him. The distance was just over 1 kilometer, a walk Jason had taken before without any issues. Given that the shooting occurred close to apartment buildings, police believed someone in the area may have seen something suspicious. Investigators broadened their efforts by speaking with individuals who had been near Highfield Park that night. They wanted to know if anyone had noticed a person acting strangely before or after the shooting. While some residents recalled hearing footsteps, there were no clear descriptions of a suspect. With limited evidence, police considered whether Jason's murder could have been a case of mistaken identity. This theory was difficult to prove, but investigators could not ignore the fact that he had no known enemies or criminal connections. If Jason had not been the intended target, it was possible that the person responsible had mistaken him for someone else. As weeks passed, the case remained at a standstill. Law enforcement continued to urge the public to come forward with any information, emphasizing that even the smallest detail could be significant. Despite these efforts, no one provided the key piece of evidence needed to move the investigation forward. Months after Jason MacCullough's murder, the investigation remained active, but progress was slow. Detectives reviewed every lead they had gathered, hoping to find a missing connection. The lack of physical evidence made the case difficult, and without witnesses willing to come forward, police were left with few options. In an effort to generate new leads, law enforcement released composite sketches of 5 men seen in the area around the time of the shooting. These individuals were considered persons of interest, though police never identified them as suspects. Investigators hoped that someone in the community would recognize them and provide useful information. Despite these efforts, none of the men in the sketches were officially linked to the crime. A year after the murder, an unexpected development put Jason's case back in the public eye. Authorities arrested a group of men for an unrelated home invasion that had occurred just hours before Jason was killed. This crime took place only a few hundred meters from the pathway where his body was found. During the home invasion, one of the men brandished a firearm, adding to speculation that Jason's murder could have been connected. However, while the individuals involved in the break-in were charged for that crime, none were ever formally accused in Jason's case. Over time, the investigation faced new challenges. Witnesses who may have had crucial information were either unwilling or afraid to speak. Some members of the community believed that people with knowledge of the crime were staying silent out of fear of retaliation. This silence made it nearly impossible for police to confirm theories or rule out suspects. Years later, Jason's case was added to the Rewards for Major Unsolved Crimes program, offering a financial reward for information leading to an arrest. Despite this incentive, no one provided the evidence needed to solve the case. Police have continued to urge anyone with knowledge of what happened that night to come forward, emphasizing that even after decades, it is never too late for justice. As the years passed, Jason MacCullough's murder remained one of Nova Scotia's most haunting cold cases. Despite continued appeals from police and Jason's family, no one had come forward with the crucial information needed to solve the case. Investigators continued to believe that multiple witnesses were present at the time of the shooting, but the silence surrounding the crime remained unbroken. In April of the year 2005, law enforcement announced they were searching for a woman believed to have been in Highfield Park on the night of Jason's murder. They did not disclose what connection she might have had to the case, but it was clear that investigators hoped she could provide new insight. However, there was no public confirmation that she was ever identified or located. In the year 2014, former Detective Tom Martin, who had worked on Jason's case from the very beginning, stated that investigators had come very, very close to laying charges that year. However, without a witness willing to testify or provide direct evidence, the case could not move forward. The challenge of solving Jason's murder mirrored the struggles seen in other unsolved cases, where key individuals remained silent despite knowing what had happened. By the 20th anniversary of Jason's murder in the year 2019, Halifax Regional Police released another public statement urging anyone with information to come forward. They emphasized that even small details could help break the case, and they hoped that the passage of time would encourage witnesses to speak. The case remained open, and police assured the public that they were still committed to finding answers. Jason MacCullough's family never stopped seeking justice. His parents, Carolyn and Alan MacCullough, continued to speak out, reminding the community that their son's life was stolen in an act of senseless violence. They urged anyone with information to imagine how they would feel if they had lost a loved one in such a way. The murder of Jason MacCullough remains a painful mystery. His name is still listed in the Rewards for Major Unsolved Crimes program, and law enforcement maintains that solving the case is possible if the right person comes forward. Until then, his family, friends, and community continue to wait for the justice that has eluded them for so long. To understand why Daniel Baker's disappearance shook Halifax so deeply, you first need to understand who he was. Daniel was 40 years old in 1997, born and raised in Nova Scotia. He wasn't a stranger to the city streets where he vanished. Halifax was home, a place he knew intimately. People who knew him described him as thoughtful and dependable, a man quietly rebuilding his life after periods of personal struggle. Daniel stood 6'1" and had a slender frame, weighing around 155 pounds. He had short, dark blonde hair, fair skin, and bright blue eyes that friends often recalled as calm and attentive. His appearance was unassuming, but he carried himself with a sense of quiet purpose. Daniel's life at the time of his disappearance had an air of stability. He had recently moved back to Halifax from Bridgewater in July of 1997, choosing to reconnect with his old neighborhood and resume work and daily routines he had long left behind. Those close to him said Daniel enjoyed the simple routines of city life. He knew his streets, the restaurants, and the small shops in his area. His move back to Halifax was not impulsive. It was a deliberate decision to rebuild a sense of normalcy. Friends and family described him as someone who valued routine, who rarely acted without thought, and who had no known conflicts that might endanger him. Even in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, Daniel's life appeared ordinary. He went to work, ran errands, and spent time with family. There were no warnings, no messages, hinting at fear or danger, and no plans to leave suddenly. That ordinary, predictable existence is part of what makes the events of December 12th so chilling. Here was a man living a normal life, familiar with his surroundings, who vanished in a way that defies logic. By looking closely at who Daniel Baker was, his habits, his personality, and his life in Halifax, we begin to see why his disappearance is so haunting. It wasn't a case of someone lost in a strange city or caught in a dangerous situation by accident. This was a man who walked out of his home for a simple, short journey and then simply disappeared. The story of Daniel Baker begins not with chaos or danger, but with the quiet, ordinary life of a man who should have been safe in his own city. The evening of Daniel Baker's disappearance began like any other Friday night in Halifax. It was December 12th, 1997, and the city was settled into the early winter chill. Daniel was at a house on Preston Street, a residential area not far from the bustling commercial stretch of Quinpool Road. Around 11 p.m., he decided to step out for a short walk to a nearby restaurant, a journey that, under normal circumstances, would have taken just a few minutes. Daniel dressed for the winter weather, wearing a black suede jacket, blue jeans, and black leather gloves. Underneath, he wore a dark blue, red, and white dress shirt, and on his feet were white Reebok sneakers. Every detail of his clothing would later become a critical part of police descriptions, as these were the last known visual records of him. The walk Daniel planned was short, along well-lit streets that would have seen some late-night foot and vehicle traffic. Preston Street leads directly to Quinpool Road, a main thoroughfare lined with shops and restaurants. Despite the late hour, the route was familiar and safe, a path he had walked many times before. Yet, within moments of leaving the house, Daniel simply vanished. Witnesses did not see anything unusual, and no disturbances were reported in the immediate area. There were no sounds of a struggle and no objects left behind that might suggest an accident or confrontation. By the time anyone realized he had not arrived at the restaurant, Daniel had already disappeared from the streets of Halifax. His last known direction was north along Preston Street toward Quinpool Road, but he never reached his destination. The suddenness of his disappearance left an immediate sense of urgency. Daniel had walked only a short distance, yet in the span of those few minutes, he seemed to disappear into thin air. The ordinary walk that evening transformed into a baffling mystery, one that left family, friends, and neighbors stunned and searching for answers. For a man so familiar with his surroundings, who was taking no unusual risks, his disappearance was as inexplicable as it was terrifying. The night Daniel vanished would mark the beginning of one of Nova Scotia's most puzzling unsolved cases, a case defined not by evidence, but by absence. The streets he walked remained ordinary, familiar, and visible, yet he was gone without a trace, leaving behind a question that would haunt the city for decades to come. Once it became clear that Daniel Baker had not returned from his short walk, concern quickly turned into alarm. His family reported him missing to the Halifax Regional Police, triggering an investigation that would stretch over decades. From the very beginning, officers were faced with an unusual challenge. There was no obvious crime scene, no signs of a struggle, and no immediate clues to follow. In the first days after his disappearance, police canvassed the neighborhood thoroughly. They knocked on doors along Preston Street and Quinpool Road, speaking with residents and local business owners. Investigators worked to recreate Daniel's final known movements, seeking anyone who might have seen him during that brief walk. Despite these efforts, every lead turned cold. Neighbors reported nothing out of the ordinary, and there were no eyewitness accounts to indicate what might have happened. Authorities also examined Daniel's personal life for possible explanations. They interviewed friends, co-workers, and family members to understand his routines, relationships, and state of mind. Daniel had no known conflicts, no unexplained deaths, and no history suggesting he would voluntarily disappear. Every question answered seemed to deepen the mystery, rather than provide clarity. Police also monitored his financial activity. Unlike some missing persons cases where accounts are accessed after someone leaves, Daniel's bank accounts showed no activity. His absence from financial and personal records suggested that he did not plan to vanish. Every ordinary channel that might have offered a clue, credit card usage, phone calls, or vehicle tracking, produced nothing. Over the years, the Halifax Regional Police kept the case active. While many investigations can grow cold after months or years, Daniel's file remained open. Authorities periodically release public appeals for information, especially on anniversaries of his disappearance, hoping the time might jog a memory or encourage someone with knowledge to come forward. The investigation has been meticulous and ongoing, yet Daniel Baker has never been found, leaving his case as one of the province's most enduring mysteries. Despite decades of effort, the investigation into Daniel Baker's disappearance remains defined by absence. There is no evidence of a crime scene, no confirmed sightings since that night, and no physical trace of him anywhere along his known route. The investigation continues, relying on the hope that even the smallest detail could provide the breakthrough needed to finally answer the question, what happened to Daniel Baker? With no physical evidence or confirmed sightings, Daniel Baker's disappearance has fueled numerous theories, though none can be proven. One of the most widely considered possibilities is foul play. Authorities, including the Nova Scotia Department of Justice, treat the case as suspicious. Daniel's disappearance is included in the province's Rewards for Major Unsolved Crimes program, which offers up to $150,000 for information that leads to an arrest and conviction. This program is reserved for cases where foul play is strongly suspected, highlighting the seriousness with which investigators view the situation. Some theorize that Daniel could have encountered a stranger or been the target of a carefully planned act. The complete lack of evidence, however, makes it nearly impossible to determine what, if anything, happened that night. If someone did intend to harm him, they managed to leave no trace, no belongings, no witnesses, and no forensic evidence. It is a level of precision that has made the case particularly confounding to investigators. Another possibility considered by some is that Daniel experienced a sudden accident. Given the short distance of his walk and the urban setting, it would have to have been extraordinary for an accident to leave no trace at all. Some have suggested he could have fallen or become trapped in an area that is rarely visited, though nothing was ever found to support this. Even searches along nearby waterways and public spaces turned up no clues. A third, though less likely, theory is that Daniel chose to disappear voluntarily. Friends and family consistently report that he had no indication of wanting to leave, no plans to abandon his life, and no behavior suggesting he intended to vanish. Staying hidden for decades without using bank accounts, contacting anyone, or leaving a digital trace would have required an almost impossible level of planning. For investigators and loved ones alike, the scenario remains difficult to reconcile with the man they knew. Ultimately, every theory raises more questions than answers. If foul play occurred, who was involved and why? If an accident happened, how did it leave no evidence? And if he disappeared by choice, how could someone erase themselves so completely from public and private records? Each unanswered question contributes to the enduring mystery of Daniel Baker, a case that has puzzled Halifax for nearly 3 decades and continues to challenge investigators today. Nearly 3 decades have passed since Daniel Baker vanished on that December night in 1997. Yet his disappearance continues to resonate deeply with his family and the Halifax community. For his loved ones, the absence of answers has been a source of lasting grief. Each year brings the same questions, the same uncertainty, and the same hope that someone, somewhere, may finally provide a clue. The city itself has not forgotten him. Daniel's case is frequently cited in discussions of unsolved disappearances in Nova Scotia, and his story has become part of the local consciousness. a reminder of how suddenly a life can be interrupted and how mysterious the world can sometimes be. Law enforcement continues to maintain the investigation as active, releasing appeals for information and updating public notices to keep awareness alive. The $150,000 reward, offered through the Rewards for Major Unsolved Crimes program, remains available, emphasizing that authorities are still seeking leads. Investigators stress that even the smallest piece of information, something that may have seemed insignificant at the time, could be crucial in finally solving the case. The continued efforts demonstrate a commitment to finding justice and closure for Daniel and his family. While decades of investigation have produced no definitive answers, the hope persists that the truth will one day emerge, whether through new evidence, a witness coming forward, or a chance discovery. The story of Daniel Baker is far from closed. His disappearance is a reminder that some mysteries endure, haunting communities and families for generations. Daniel Baker remains missing, and his story is a quiet but powerful testament to the unresolved nature of many disappearances. The search for answers continues, fueled by the determination of law enforcement, the vigilance of the public, and the enduring love of those who have never stopped hoping. Until the day the mystery is solved, Daniel's absence serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring need for answers in the face of the unknown.